I am going to talk about unemployment as a social problem. And I'm going to start with a premise. How we think about a social issue, how it's dominantly framed, both in terms of what causes that problem and how we should solve that problem, then shapes possibilities for the kinds of services Carol was talking about. It shapes possibilities for individuals' lives and their possibilities for work, and it shapes possibilities for policies. And today I'm going to draw, as a researcher, I'm of course going to draw on some research results. And this was a study on long-term unemployment we did in London, Ontario, as well as St. Louis, Missouri, and I want to recognize I didn't do this study by myself, of course. I did it with many colleagues, many graduate students, and with community organizations. And I'm using this to forward one key argument. Moving forward in addressing unemployment in equitable, sustainable, and inclusive ways requires reimagining dominant problem and solution frames for unemployment. So our research, in line with a growing body of social critique, demonstrates that we need a leap of imagination, and I think that's what Carol was starting to talk about, to counter a dominant individualization of long-term unemployment and create new ways and spaces for assessing or addressing unemployment as a social issue. So, what do I mean by individualization logic, or the individualization of unemployment? So, situated with neoliberalism, which is basically a way of governing that's increasingly used across institutions, unemployment has progressively been reframed in ways that align with this idea of individualization, meaning it's framed as an individual problem. It's often located in deficiencies related to skills, knowledge, attitudes, or motivation. In turn, the responsibility is downloaded onto individuals, leading to solutions focused on activating so-called at-risk individuals to engage in activities aimed at avoiding state dependency and enhancing their employability. Within a climate of austerity cutbacks, solution frames involve enacting stricter job search requirements and surveillance with penalties for noncompliance. This individualization also involves a one-size-fits-all approach, so that social conditions that differentially shape people's possibilities, such as health status or citizenship status, become invisible and not attended to, as do the socio-economic forces producing unemployment. As well, this logic promotes a work-first solution frame where success is measured by, I got work, versus the quality or the sustainability of that work. Put simply, neoliberal individualization conveys that what happens to a person, including being unemployed, is a matter of personal responsibility and choice, and it places the onus on individuals to overcome their disadvantaged identities. This problem frame fails to recognize the inequitable distribution of resources and opportunities required to make these so-called choices: going to university, obtaining secure housing, and it can promote a victim-blaming approach. In turn, such individualization of social issues has been connected to increasing inequities, as well as enhanced precarity, particularly amongst already marginalized groups. So over the past 4 years, I've been part of this qualitative study. We've conducted it in 2 cities, and we really wanted to examine the implications of individualization for how long-term unemployment is negotiated within employment support services and also by individuals in their everyday lives. And today I'm going to focus on one axis of diversity in my examples, that of age, to illustrate why we need to move beyond individualizing problem and solution frames. So I'm not going to talk a lot about methods. It was a 4-phase design. We tried to understand unemployment from various perspectives, starting with policy and key stakeholders, and ending with people who were living and self-identified as long-term unemployed. And in this presentation, I'm going to draw data from people who were unemployed when they were 50 or older, and also data from service providers. And I want to illustrate one of the study's key insights. The contemporary individualization frame fails to promote the resolution of unemployment for many citizens, given systematic and structural factors. Indeed, it shapes a prolonged situation of being activated but stuck. Being activated but stuck was a pervasive situation conveyed by participants. As stated by one older unemployed client, "I'm losing money, I'm losing time, I'm dead, and I'm stuck in this track or in this mud that I just can't seem to get out of." Within this situation, participants were activated within policy and service frames. They were pursuing a range of individually focused solutions to try to find work and enhance their employability. However, none of these solutions addressed the fundamental systematic and structural barriers they faced. They described being stuck and having a life on hold, not just in terms of work and unemployment, but in other ways, being stuck in the present, being stuck in relationships, being stuck in inadequate housing, or being stuck in survival mode. Participants described an intensive, ongoing negotiation of space, time, and resources to ensure survival, while increasingly unable to envision any future. As displayed in the next slide, the stuckness was produced through the misfit of individualized problem and solution frames and the complex ways unemployment is socially and politically shaped. At its core, our research illustrates that complex intersections of structural, systematic, and personal factors perpetuate unemployment in ways that cannot be resolved through individual action alone. This slide captures some of these intersecting factors, such as discrimination tied to personal and social characteristics, insecurities arising out of a lack of stable resources and work histories within contexts characterized by receding resources, increasing credentialism, and labor market transformations. I now turn to some specific findings around aging to illustrate that despite a recognition of these structural barriers, there was a persistent tendency, shaped by dominant problem and solution frames, to frame being older as an individual barrier to overcome through individual action, leaving both service providers and aging unemployed individuals stuck in moving forward. In terms of locating the problem of unemployment, older unemployed participants, so their quotes are marked by an OU, and sometimes service providers marked by an SP, actually spoke to the structural and systematic barriers to reemployment tied to age. As these quotes illustrate, barriers discussed included ageist attitudes, beliefs and practices amongst employers, as well as a privileging of younger workers tied to an undervaluing of the skills and experiences of older workers, as well as profit-driven motives. Both service providers and aging clients provided examples of how age intersected with other social attributes, such as being an immigrant, in ways that created multiple intersecting disadvantage. Thus, at one level, service providers and aging clients understood older workers as at risk, as a collective, not just as deficient individuals, seemingly working against this dominant individualizing frame. However, despite such recognition, service providers predominantly located the problem of unemployment with individual characteristics of older clients, also tying these to age. I want to emphasize I'm not blaming service providers. They're in a system, they're within a logic of individualization that shapes this problem as an individual problem and that creates possibilities for individual solutions. It creates few possibilities to work at that systematic or structural level. In particular, service providers emphasized attributes of older workers as a collective, such as having a fatalistic mindset, unrealistic expectations, stubbornness leading to holding out for jobs, lacking in desire to stay updated, having a lack of flexibility with respect to work and wages, and having decreased employability simply because of age. In turn, despite recognition of systematic and structural barriers, when speaking to solution frames enacted in services, there was a sole emphasis on individualized strategies. Again, this is what the system and the structure enables, such as using approaches to change clients' mindsets about age being a barrier or about themselves as old. Aligned with a work-first orientation, there was a need to persuade older clients to be more realistic about age discrimination, so that their expectations for work would be realistic, including precarious work and work with significantly reduced wages. Service providers encouraged strategies aimed at disguising age through modifying appearance, behavior, and resumes, and spoke to encouraging clients to take up the view that perhaps their capability as workers had decreased as they aged. Overall, service providers and clients spoke to the need to accept ageism as the way the world is, and to either attempt to subvert it or accept it and work within its limitations. At the same time, both service providers and older unemployed clients talked about being stuck. They acknowledged these individualized strategies weren't working for many and rather created tensions and produced precarity. Service providers expressed being stuck in facilitating meaningful, sustainable work for older clients, as they found there aren't that many ways to deal with age discrimination. As conveyed in the second service provider quote, they experienced tensions when trying to persuade clients that reemployment was possible, while thinking that some of their older clients aren't going to find anything. Older unemployed clients spoke about losing hope, in feeling increasingly stuck and uncertain about the present and the future. They spoke to being increasingly at risk in the forms of employment available to them. For example, the first quote conveys how a growing sense of desperation led some aging unemployed clients to take up work that put them at risk for being abused. As well, participants, as conveyed in the second quote, were living increasingly financially and socially restricted lives, knowing they were losing time to accrue resources and simultaneously spending out money that they had put aside for later life. So, in conclusion, I presented these findings to support the argument that moving forward in addressing unemployment in equitable, sustainable ways requires reimagining the dominant problem and solution frames for unemployment. Given the intersecting multiple factors producing and sustaining unemployment, it's crucial to build collaborations in London and other contexts across sectors that engage in participatory processes that include the range of persons with lived knowledge of unemployment. We need to move beyond inadvertently being stuck in reproducing individualized solutions. We need to think outside the box to shape solution frames that address the need for changes at various levels. We also need to address the situation of being activated but stuck. It's essential that such efforts address ways to create a secure base for living for a greater diversity of citizens, including those not engaged in formal work, as a means to promote health, social, and other forms of equity and inclusion. Thank you.